Sunset Ridge by Clara Winslow. The sun cast long shadows across Sunset Ridge as Margaret Byrne stood at the edge of town, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains. The year was 1873, and after 3 days on the stagecoach from Philadelphia, she had finally arrived in Wyoming Territory. The journey had been long, the accommodations sparse, but nothing could diminish the hope that had carried her across the country. "Miss Byrne," a deep voice startled her from behind. Margaret turned to find a tall man watching her, his expression guarded beneath the brim of a worn Stetson. The badge pinned to his vest caught the sunlight. "Sheriff Thomas Reid," he said, extending a calloused hand. "I received a telegram you'd be arriving today." "Yes, Sheriff." She shook his hand, noting the strength in his grip. "I'm here about the position at the Mercantile." His eyes, the color of a summer sky, assessed her quickly. "You don't look like someone who'd choose to come all this way for a shop position." Margaret lifted her chin. "Perhaps you shouldn't judge by appearances, Sheriff." A hint of a smile played at his lips. "Perhaps not. Let me help with your luggage. Mr. Wilson is expecting you." As they walked down the main street, Margaret became acutely aware of the stares from townsfolk going about their business. Women in practical dresses nodded politely while men tipped their hats. She straightened her back, determined not to show how foreign this frontier town felt. "You'll have to forgive the attention," Thomas said, his voice low. "We don't get many new faces in Sunset Ridge, especially not," he paused. "Especially not unmarried women from the East," she supplied. He had the decency to look embarrassed. "I was going to say especially not someone with your refined manner, but I suppose that's accurate too." The Mercantile stood at the center of town, a large wooden building with Wilson's General Store painted in faded letters across the front. Inside, shelves filled with goods lined the walls: tools, fabric, preserved food, medicines, a testament to the necessities of frontier life. Harold Wilson, a rotund man with kind eyes, welcomed her warmly. "Miss Byrne, what a pleasure to finally meet you. Your letters were most impressive." "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Wilson." "I'll leave you to it," Sheriff Reid said, setting down her trunk. His eyes met hers briefly. "Welcome to Sunset Ridge, Miss Byrne." After he departed, Mr. Wilson showed Margaret to her quarters above the store, a small but tidy room with a bed, a writing desk, and a window overlooking the main street. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Margaret sat at the window, watching the town settle into evening. In the distance, she could see Sheriff Reid making his rounds, his tall figure distinctive even in the growing twilight. She had come west to escape the constraints of Philadelphia society, to build a life on her own terms. What she hadn't expected was the immediate pull she felt toward the lawman with the guarded eyes. Thomas Reid had been sheriff of Sunset Ridge for 5 years. Ever since the previous sheriff, his mentor, had been killed in a bank robbery. At 32, Thomas had seen enough violence and hardship to last several lifetimes. The Civil War had claimed his youth, and the years afterward had hardened him into a man who valued order and peace above all. The arrival of Margaret Byrne threatened that peace, not because she posed any danger to the town, but because of the unexpected stirring she caused within him. As he made his evening rounds, Thomas found himself glancing up at the window above Wilson's store, where a lamp now glowed. What was a clearly educated woman from Philadelphia doing in a frontier town like Sunset Ridge? The story about coming for the mercantile position didn't fully convince him. People came west for new beginnings, true enough, but they also came to escape something. The next morning, Thomas encountered Margaret again as she organized merchandise at the front of the store. "Sheriff," she acknowledged with a nod, her copper hair neatly pinned back, revealing the delicate curve of her neck. "Miss Byrne, settling in?" "Yes, thank you. Mr. Wilson has been most accommodating." Thomas noticed a small book tucked beside the cash register. "Tennyson." Surprise flickered across her face. "You're familiar with his work." "I may wear a badge now, but I wasn't born on horseback." He offered a small smile. "My father was a schoolteacher in Missouri. Our home had more books than furniture." Margaret's expression softened. "My father was the same way. Books were sacred in our household." For a moment, they stood in comfortable silence, an unexpected connection bridging the space between them. "Will you be attending the town social this Saturday?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. "I wasn't aware there was one." "Every month at the church. Nothing fancy, but it's good for the community." Margaret hesitated, then smiled. Then I suppose I should attend to become part of the community." As Thomas left the store, he felt lighter than he had in months. It was a dangerous feeling for a man in his position. Attachment meant vulnerability, and vulnerability could be fatal in a place where the law was sometimes only as strong as the man who enforced it. Margaret's first week at Wilson's store passed in a blur of new experiences. She learned to use the complex system of ledgers that tracked inventory and credit accounts for local ranchers. She became familiar with the steady stream of customers, from the ranch hands who came in for tobacco and ammunition to the wives who purchased fabric and household necessities. By Saturday, she had begun to feel less like an outsider. Miss Patterson, the doctor's wife, had invited her to tea, and young Sally Jenkins had asked for help selecting ribbon for her hair. Even the gruff Mr. Simmons, who owned the livery stable, had warmed to her when she demonstrated knowledge about quality leather goods. As evening approached, Margaret found herself standing before the small mirror in her room, pinning her hair in a simple but elegant style. She had brought only one dress suitable for social occasions, a deep blue gown with modest lace trim at the collar and wrists. It was far less elaborate than what she would have worn in Philadelphia, but here it would likely be considered quite formal. The social was already underway when she arrived at the church. Lanterns cast a warm glow over tables laden with food, and a small group of musicians played lively tunes on fiddle, banjo, and harmonica. Children darted between groups of adults, their laughter mingling with the music. "Miss Byrne." Sheriff Reid appeared at her side, looking different without his badge. His clean shirt and dark vest gave him a distinguished appearance that matched the intelligence in his eyes. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I gave my word, didn't I?" He smiled, a real smile that transformed his face. "That you did. Would you care for some punch?" As they made their way toward the refreshment table, Margaret was introduced to what seemed like half the town. Everyone was curious about the newcomer, but their questions were asked with genuine interest rather than the thinly veiled scrutiny she had grown accustomed to in Philadelphia drawing rooms. "Thomas hasn't escorted anyone to a social in years," whispered Emma Miller, the seamstress, with a knowing look. "Not since Sarah Williams left for Denver." Before Margaret could respond, the music changed to a waltz, and Thomas returned with 2 cups of punch. "Would you care to dance, Miss Byrne?" he asked, setting down the cups. "I'd be delighted, Sheriff." His hand at her waist was warm and steady as he guided her into the dance. For a man who spent his days on horseback and patrolling rough country, he moved with surprising grace. "You dance well for a frontier lawman," she remarked. "And you seem comfortable for an Eastern lady in a room full of strangers. Perhaps we're both more adaptable than we appear." As they circled the floor, Margaret felt the weight of curious stares, but she found herself caring less about what others might think than she had in years. Here she was free from the expectations that had suffocated her in Philadelphia, free from her family's disappointment after she had broken her engagement to Henry Whitcomb, a man whose social connections were impeccable, but whose character had proven less so. Later, as Thomas walked her back to the Mercantile under a canopy of stars, Margaret found herself sharing pieces of her story. "My father died last winter," she explained. "After the funeral, I discovered he had left significant debts. The house had to be sold, and suddenly the life I had known was gone." It was clarifying, in a way. "How so?" Thomas asked softly. "I realized I had been living according to others' expectations. The respectable daughter, the perfect fiancée, roles I played without question, until everything fell apart." She paused. "When I saw Mr. Wilson's advertisement seeking help with his books, it seemed like fate, a chance to start fresh where no one knew me." They stopped at the entrance to the Mercantile. In the moonlight, Thomas's expression was thoughtful. "Starting fresh isn't easy," he said, "but Sunset Ridge has a way of growing on people. Is that what happened to you?" He looked toward the distant mountains. "Something like that. Good night, Miss Byrne." Over the next 2 months, Sunset Ridge began to feel less like a refuge and more like home to Margaret. She had established a comfortable routine, managing the store during the day and often taking dinner with the Wilsons or the Pattersons in the evening. On Sundays she attended church services, finding unexpected comfort in the simple faith of her new community. Thomas became a regular visitor to the Mercantile, sometimes on official business but often with no reason beyond checking that all was well. Their conversations ranged from literature to local politics, and Margaret found herself looking forward to his visits with an eagerness that both thrilled and frightened her. One afternoon in early summer, Thomas entered the store with unusual urgency. "Margaret," he said, foregoing formality, "I need supplies. Enough for 3 days." "What's happened?" she asked, already gathering jerky and hardtack. "Telegram from Silver Creek. A young boy's gone missing in the mountains. His father and 2 others went looking 3 days ago, but now they're overdue too." Margaret efficiently packed provisions, adding extra bandages and a small bottle of whiskey for medicinal purposes. "Take this as well," she said, pressing a small compass into his hand. "It was my father's." Thomas's fingers closed around hers. "I'll return it to you. I promise." "See that you do, Sheriff," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "And return yourself safely as well." After Thomas departed with 2 local men who had volunteered to join the search, Margaret found herself watching the mountain trail long after they had disappeared from view. The familiar knot of fear in her stomach, the one that had formed when her father fell ill and had never fully dissipated, tightened painfully. Days passed with agonizing slowness. Margaret threw herself into work, reorganizing inventory and deep cleaning shelves that didn't truly need attention. Each time the door opened, she looked up expectantly, only to mask her disappointment when it wasn't Thomas. On the 4th day, just as she was closing the store, shouts from the edge of town drew her outside. Through the gathering dusk, she could make out riders approaching, 5 figures on weary horses. The whole town seemed to materialize on the main street as Thomas rode in, a small boy cradled before him on his saddle. Behind him came the boy's father and the other men, dirty and exhausted but alive. Dr. Patterson rushed forward to take the child, who appeared weak but conscious. As Thomas dismounted, Margaret could see blood staining his left sleeve. Without thinking, she pushed through the crowd. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he said, but the pallor of his face suggested otherwise. "Let me help you to the doctor's." Later, after Dr. Patterson had cleaned and stitched the deep gash on Thomas's arm, the result of a fall on sharp rocks during the search, Margaret sat beside him on the doctor's porch. "The boy will recover," Thomas said, his voice rough with fatigue. He'd wandered nearly 5 miles from their camp, following a deer trail, got himself completely turned around. "And his father?" "Broke his ankle trying to find him. The other men stayed with him while I kept searching." He reached into his pocket with his good arm and extracted her compass. "This helped more than you know. The mountains play tricks with directions." As she took back the compass, their fingers brushed, and Margaret felt a current pass between them that had nothing to do with the warm summer night. "I was afraid," she admitted quietly, "when you didn't return by the 3rd day." Thomas's blue eyes met hers, unguarded for once. "I thought of you out there, when things looked bleakest." He paused. "It's been a long time since I've had someone to come back to." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable in a way that touched something deep within Margaret. "I'm glad you came back," she whispered. Summer gave way to early fall, bringing crisp mornings and the rich colors of changing leaves to the mountains surrounding Sunset Ridge. Margaret had been in town for nearly 4 months now, and the once foreign landscape had become dear to her. Her relationship with Thomas had deepened, moving beyond cautious friendship to something neither of them had put into words yet. They often walked together on Sunday afternoons, sometimes talking for hours, other times comfortable in shared silence. It was during one such walk that Thomas finally spoke of his past. "I was married once," he said as they sat on a hillside overlooking the valley. "Her name was Rebecca. We were childhood sweethearts in Missouri." Margaret listened quietly, sensing the weight of the story he was sharing. "When the war came, I joined up with the Union. I was gone 3 years. His voice grew distant. "By the time I returned, she had married my cousin. Said she couldn't bear the waiting, not knowing if I was alive or dead from 1 month to the next." "I'm sorry," Margaret said softly. Thomas shook his head. "It was a lifetime ago. After that, I drifted west, worked as a ranch hand, then a deputy in Colorado before ending up here." He looked at her directly. "I never expected to feel anything like this again." The confession stole Margaret's breath. "Like what?" "Like I've found something worth staying for, something that matters more than old hurts or caution." Before she could respond, shouting erupted from the direction of town. They both turned to see a rider approaching at breakneck speed. "Sheriff," the man called. "Trouble at the saloon. Jenkins and McCauley are at it again, but this time Jenkins pulled a gun." Thomas was on his feet instantly, the intimate moment shattered. Get back to town, he told Margaret firmly. Stay at the Mercantile until I come for you. As he sprinted toward town, Margaret felt a cold fear grip her heart. The peaceful afternoon had transformed in an instant, reminding her of the dangers that were part of life on the frontier, especially for a man who wore a badge. By the time she reached town, a crowd had gathered outside the saloon. The sound of breaking glass and raised voices carried into the street. Then came the unmistakable crack of a gunshot. The crowd scattered as Margaret pushed her way forward, terror freezing the blood in her veins. She reached the saloon doors just as Thomas emerged, his face grim as he marched a struggling man in handcuffs toward the jail. Is anyone hurt? She called out. Thomas shook his head, his expression softening slightly when he saw her. Just property damage. I'll explain later. Relief left her weak-kneed as she made her way back to the Mercantile. Inside, she found Mr. Wilson looking concerned. That Jenkins has a temper when he drinks, the shopkeeper said, shaking his head. One of these days, someone's going to get killed. Thomas, the sheriff, seems to handle him well. Mr. Wilson gave her a knowing look. Thomas is a good man. Best sheriff this town's ever had. He paused. He's been different since you arrived, lighter somehow. Margaret felt her cheeks warm. We're friends. Of course, Mr. Wilson replied, not bothering to hide his smile. Just friends. Later that evening, a knock at the store's back entrance revealed Thomas, looking weary but unharmed. Jenkins is sleeping it off in a cell, he said, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. Macaulay decided not to press charges. Once he sobered up enough to remember, he threw the first punch. They sat at the small table in the back room, the lamp casting soft shadows across Thomas's features. You scared me today, Margaret admitted. It's part of the job. I know. But understanding that in theory is different from watching you run toward danger. Thomas reached across the table to take her hand. I've been doing this a long time, Margaret. I'm careful. But one day, careful might not be enough. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. To care for a man like Thomas meant accepting the risks that came with his badge, the knowledge that each goodbye could be the last. I can't promise nothing will ever happen, he said quietly. But I can promise that what I feel for you is stronger than anything I've known. Margaret's heart raced. And what is it that you feel, Sheriff Reid? I think you know. His thumb traced circles on her palm. I've fallen in love with you, Margaret Byrne. Against my better judgment, despite my plans to keep my distance, I love you. The confession, simple and direct, broke something loose within her, the last of her reservations, the final barrier she had built around her heart. I love you too, she whispered, though heaven knows it wasn't in my plans either. His smile transformed his face, erasing the weariness and worry. Are you saying I disrupted the organized life of Margaret Byrne? Thoroughly, she confirmed, returning his smile. And I wouldn't change it for the world. As October painted the mountains with vibrant hues, Margaret found herself facing an unexpected dilemma. A letter had arrived from Philadelphia, her cousin Jane writing with news that changed everything. An uncle had died, leaving Margaret a modest inheritance. Not a fortune, but enough to secure her future if she wished to return east. You've been quiet all day, Thomas observed as they sat on the porch of the small house he rented at the edge of town. Is something troubling you? Margaret handed him the letter. It arrived yesterday. Thomas read it quickly, his expression carefully neutral. When he looked up, his eyes held a question he wouldn't voice. I'm not going back, she said firmly. Relief flickered across his face. Are you certain? This money could give you back the life you lost. Margaret shook her head. That life feels like it belonged to someone else now. Someone I barely recognize. She took his hand. My life is here now, with the store, the town, she paused. With you. Thomas pulled her close, pressing his lips to her forehead. I want to build a life with you, Margaret. Not just stolen moments and Sunday walks. Her heart swelled. What are you saying, Thomas? He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. Inside lay a ring, a simple silver band set with a single small sapphire. It's not fancy, he said, suddenly looking uncertain. Not what you might have had in Philadelphia. It's perfect, she whispered, tears blurring her vision. Margaret Byrne, will you marry me? Will you make a home with me here, knowing all that comes with loving a man who wears this badge? She thought of the fear she had felt watching him run toward danger, the nights she had lain awake worrying when he was out on patrol. but she also thought of his gentle strength, his unwavering integrity, and the love that had grown between them, unexpected and unplanned but more real than anything she had known before. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and sure. "Yes, I will marry you, Thomas Reid." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Margaret knew that her journey west had never truly been about escaping her past. It had been about finding her future, a future that now stood before her with love in his eyes and promise in his touch. In Sunset Ridge, she had found not just a new beginning, but a place to belong, a community to cherish, and a love worth every risk it carried. The distant mountains stood sentinel as Thomas drew her into his arms, their silhouette a reminder of the challenges they had overcome and those that still lay ahead. But Margaret wasn't afraid anymore. Together they would face whatever came, writing their story in the rugged beauty of the land they both now called home.